We're in Job chapter 32. We'll do 32, 33, and 34. Yeah, I didn't tell you that we were in the book of Job, did I, Earl? Otherwise, you wouldn't have come tonight, right? Still, okay. We're still in the book of Job. Oh, come on. We haven't been in there that long. Before we jump into the study, I want to remind you that next Thursday night is a movie night. And it's really a very good movie. I really enjoyed the movie, and I'm going to show you the trailer. The movie's going to start like at 7:05 because it's a 2-hour movie. And so we're already stretching it with Joy in the children's ministry if we go over half an hour. So I don't want to go over an hour and a half, or whatever. So we're going to start right around 7:05, and here's the trailer for the movie.
Do you believe in the cross of Christ?
I'm a pastor.
If you believe, then the question is, what are you going to do about it?
What does it mean to believe? It is forgiveness. It is redemption. It is unconditional love.
Where was God the night we lost Kathleen?
Just because we're on the street doesn't mean that I'm a bad mother.
From the looks of things, she couldn't care less whether we save her or not.
I can't just turn her away.
Not asking you to. It's a miracle.
There's no such thing as miracles. I saved these people. I should get the credit. I won't apologize for sharing the gospel with a dying man.
This cross is gonna cost you.
You're about to throw everything away.
I don't have a choice.
This is our one moment. Everything changes for us.
Stop, please!
I've been where you're going. You have to choose. Take the first step. That'll change your life.
I was once asked, wait, Jesus lived his.
See, Mommy? God really does love us.
He does, baby.
Next Thursday. So, Job chapter 32. Job is going through the worst time that anyone could ever imagine. He has lost his possessions, his children have died, his health has failed. And what makes this so confusing through all of this is that Job is a good guy. We all make the mistake that Job and his friends all make, which is we think that when bad times happen to us, we think, what did I do wrong? What am I being punished for? But the whole point through the whole book of Job is that Job's a good guy. And you can't make that mistake in thinking that every time somebody goes through a difficulty that it's because they're a bad person. God has decided that he's awfully proud of Job. And he wants to show the universe what happens when a man who trusts him goes through difficult times, that he's not going to turn his back on God. There's a couple things you got to keep in mind. We've been reminded of this through the book of Job. Sometimes Job is wrong. He is. He's just wrong. And he's going to get rebuked today for some things that are proper. God's going to rebuke him for a few things. Sometimes Job's friends are wrong because this whole book is this debate between Job and his friends about why is this happening. Sometimes his friends are wrong. Sometimes his friends have truth that they speak. We'll see that again tonight. But the truth just doesn't apply to Job because we know from the very beginning of the book and the end of the book, we know what God thinks. And so we always have to keep comparing things against what God thinks about Job. You have to be careful in the book of Job about building doctrines on some of the things that Job or his friends say because sometimes they're wrong. This book is not meant for teaching doctrine. It's to show you how people respond to difficulty. And that is something that we're learning. We're learning how we all respond differently to difficulty. Job has three main friends. They've been debating back and forth. They're all done talking. They're done. And we're now going to hear from a fourth person in chapter 33, verse 1. So these three men ceased answering Job because he was righteous in his own eyes. Then the wrath of Elihu, the son of Barachel, the Buzite of the family of Ram, was aroused against Job. His wrath was aroused because he justified himself rather than God. Also against his three friends his wrath was aroused because they had found no answer and yet had condemned Job. So we meet Elihu, the son of Barachel, the Buzite. We talked about at the beginning of the book, we think this is one of the earliest books actually written. We think that it probably dates back to the time of Abraham. That means it predates Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, because those were written by Moses 600 years after Abraham. Here's more tie-ins to the time of Abraham. Elihu's dad was a Buzite, or Buz, which means he could have been Abraham's nephew was named Buz, who lived back in Haran. Buz had an older brother named Uz. I'm not making this up. Uz and Buz. Buzz, buzz, buzz. And Job, does anybody remember what land Job lived in? He lived in the land of Uz. So again, we have more connections. And you can find those, Genesis 22, verse 21 is where you're going to find those names. Verse 4, now because they were years older than he, Elihu had waited to speak to Job. So he's not as old as the other guys. He's showing respect. He's waiting, and now it's his turn. And when he saw that there was no answer in the mouth of these three men, his wrath was aroused. So he's listening to these debates back and forth, and he's just getting angrier and angrier. He's angry at Job because while Job is defending himself against all his friends' accusations, he's also been accusing God of being mean. He's been accusing that God, you're just being mean to me. This is not fair. He's also angry with Job's friends because they keep accusing him of stuff that they don't have proof of. And so he's kind of mad. He's just mad at everybody. He's just mad. Verse 6. So Elihu, the son of Barachel, the Buzite, answered and said, I am young in years, and you are old. Therefore I was afraid and dared not declare my opinion to you. I said, age should speak, and multitude of years should teach wisdom. But there is a spirit in man, and the breath of the Almighty gives him understanding. And the idea here is that God can speak and teach a young person as well as an old person. And that's what he's claiming God's going to do through him now, though we're not sure about that. He says, great men are not always wise, nor do the aged always understand justice. So even though old age is supposed to be the place where you find wisdom, as we learned last week, not all the time. And we are very grieved. Verse 10, therefore I say, listen to me, I also will declare my opinion. Indeed, I waited for your words. I listened to your reasonings while you searched out what to say. I paid close attention to you, and surely not one of you convinced Job or answered his words. Lest you say, we have found wisdom, God will vanquish him, not man. Now he has not directed his words against me, so I will not answer him with your words. In other words, he's not going to get into the argument between Job and his friends. The friends were of the opinion that Job has some sort of secret sin, and that's why he's had all this trouble. Well, he's actually is not going to hold to that. He's going to take a different approach, and we'll see this. Verse 15. They are dismayed and answered no more. Words escaped them, talking about the three friends who haven't been able to figure out Job's problems. He says, verse 16, and I have waited because they did not speak, because they stood still and answered no more. I also will answer my part. I too will declare my opinion. For I am full of words. The spirit within me compels me. Indeed, my belly is like wine that has no vent. It is ready to burst like new wineskins. Now, We talked about this just a few weeks ago on Sunday morning. We were talking about the new wineskins, the old wineskins. Wine was fermented in leather bags. And as it ferments, CO2 is given off as the yeast interacts with the sugars of the grape juice. New wineskins might be flexible and stretch a bit, but if the gas builds up too much, the bag can still burst. And that's what he's feeling like. He's feeling like he's just about to burst. He just has to speak up. I just got to tell you this. You know what? Sometimes you really don't have to speak. Sometimes you'd really be better off just shutting up and just letting it go. Elihu is going to speak for 6 chapters. Some of what he says is okay. Some of what he says mirrors what God's going to say exactly. But some of what he says is still out there and off the wall. So when people say, well, I just have to speak, you know what? Baloney. You know, you don't always have to speak. Sometimes it would be what a Chuck used to say. It's better to keep your mouth shut and let them think you're a fool than open your mouth and dispel all doubt. Verse 20. I will speak that I may find relief. I must open my lips and answer. Let me not, I pray, show partiality to anyone, nor let me flatter any man. For I do not know how to flatter, else my Maker would soon take me away. Now, he says, let me not show partiality. These older men, these other men, they're older than Elihu. They deserve some measure of respect. But he's not going to go overboard and just flatter them because they're old guys. He's going to speak the truth as best as he knows. And there's a lesson here that there's something to learn from. I'm calling it equal treatment, because sometimes we do give certain people special treatment. And James writes, James chapter 2, my dear brothers and sisters, how can you claim to have faith in our glorious Lord Jesus Christ if you favor some people over others? For example, suppose someone comes into your meeting dressed in fancy clothes and expensive jewelry. I got to stop here and make sure. Is anybody wearing fancy clothes and expensive jewelry? Great, at least we won't offend anybody. We a po-folk church. Anyway, and another comes in who is poor and dressed in dirty clothes. If you give special attention and give a good seat to the rich person, but you say to the poor one, oh, you stand over here or else sit on the floor. Well, doesn't this discrimination show that your judgments are guided by evil motives? Listen to me, dear brothers and sisters. Hasn't God chosen the poor in this world to be rich in faith? Aren't they the ones who will inherit the kingdom he promised to those who love him? But you dishonor the poor. Isn't the rich who oppress you and drag you into court? Aren't they the ones who slander Jesus Christ, whose noble name you bear? Yes, indeed, it is good when you obey the royal law as found in the scriptures, love your neighbor as yourself. But if you favor some people over others, you are committing a sin. You are guilty of breaking the law. We ought to treat everybody the same because we have all been made by the same Creator. There was a young pastor who thought a little bit too much of himself, and it was his turn to teach the children's lesson at church. He told the children about sheep and that they weren't smart and needed lots of guidance, and that a shepherd's job was to stay close to the sheep, protect them from wild animals, and keep them from wandering off and doing dumb things that would get them hurt or killed. He pointed to the little children in the room, and he said that they were the sheep and needed lots of guidance. That the minister put his hands out to the side, palms up in dramatic gesture, and with his eyebrows raised, said to the children, if you are the sheep, then who is the shepherd? It was quiet for a few seconds. And then one of the young visitors said, Jesus is the shepherd. And the young pastor was a little bit caught by surprise because he was thinking they would say him. So he said, well, then who am I? And the little boy frowned a little bit, was thinking, and he said, well, I guess you must be the sheepdog. There you go. Roof. You got to be careful about expecting people to treat you differently. And you have to be careful about treating people differently depending on who they are. Chapter 33. But please, Job, hear my speech and listen to all my words. Now I open my mouth. My tongue speaks in my mouth. My words come from my upright heart. My lips utter pure knowledge. The Spirit of God has made me, and the breath of the Almighty gives me life. If you can answer me, set your words in order before me. Take your stand. He says, if you can answer me. He's going to challenge him that if you got something to say, speak up. But it is kind of interesting to note that he doesn't really ever give Job a chance. I just got to say that. Some people say, I'll give you a shot. And he never gives him a shot. Verse 6, truly, I am as your spokesman before God. I also have been formed out of clay. I'm your spokesman before God. Earlier, Job had cried, nor is there any mediator between us who may lay his hand on both of us. I mean, who's going to step between me and God? Will somebody speak to God for me? And it kind of sounds like he's saying, buddy, I'm the answer to your prayers. It's kind of the way it sounds to me. I don't know. He says, surely no fear of me will terrify you, nor will my hand be heavy on you. Because Elihu is just a man, Job doesn't need to be afraid of him. Verse 8. Surely you have spoken in my hearing, and I have heard the sound of your words saying. Now, the next couple verses, 9, 10, 11, he's quoting what he remembers Job to have said. So this isn't Elihu's words. This is what Elihu thinks is Job's words. And he thinks Job said, I am pure without transgression. I am innocent, and there is no iniquity in me. And actually, Job didn't really say that. This is what he was accused of saying, but this is what he had actually said. And even though Job defended his integrity, he never claimed to be perfect. That's the step he didn't take. That was a little bit, he didn't go that far. Verse 10, he's still quoting Job. Yet he finds occasions against me. He counts me as his enemy. He puts my feet in the stocks. He watches all my paths. This is what Job was saying about God. The God's just out to get me. And Job did say this. He said this exact same thing in chapter 13, verse 27. Verse 12, here's his response. Look, in this you are not righteous. I will answer you, for God is greater than man. Why do you contend with him? For he does not give an accounting of any of his words. Why do you contend with him? And I have to admit, I think that I agree with Elihu on this. This is one of Job's problems. He's accused God of being unfair, and he's fighting God over this. That's been what I kind of picked this up. Haven't you picked this up, through Job? God himself is going to say to Job, this is one of the reasons why I think he's on track on this. God will say in chapter 40, verse 2, do you still want to argue with the Almighty? You are God's critic, but do you have the answers? So God himself recognizes that Job's kind of fighting with him in a sense. And there's a principle I got to tell you. It's this: God doesn't owe you an answer. I don't know if you're going to like that or not, but he doesn't owe you an answer. Now, my 2006 Honda Civic, 4-door, sitting out in the parking lot, I own that. It's mine. It's bought and paid for. The bank doesn't even own it anymore. We paid it off a long time ago. But let's just say that I want to paint it orange. And you come up to me and you say, how dare you paint your car orange? You know what I got to say to you? I don't care what you think. It's my car. Are you tracking with me on this? You don't have a right to tell me how to paint my car. It's my car, right? Right? Stupid illustration, but I own it. So you ain't telling me what I can and can't do with it. You following me? Well, friends, God is the creator of the universe. He not only owns us, he made us. And we often, we all do this. We all do this. We argue with God over how we think he's doing. And yet, it's kind of silly for us to say, you're not being fair. How dare you do this? Because he is God. Paul will write, no, don't say that. Who are you, a mere human being, to argue with God? Should the thing that was created say to the one who created it, Why have you made me like this? When a potter makes jars out of clay, doesn't he have a right to use the same lump of clay to make one jar for decoration and another to throw garbage into? Doesn't the potter have the right to do what he wants with the clay? Does he or not? Let me see your head nod. Yes, of course he does. We're the clay, and we really don't have the right to challenge what the potter makes of us. Do you have a problem with that? To be honest, some of us do. I do at times, because I don't know why I think God made a mistake, or he didn't make me enough of this or enough of that. But he knows what he's doing. I think the bigger problem that we have is not actually in how God made us, but how little we understand of what God is doing. Because that's where we really lack. I don't understand why I have these things the way I'm made. But that's the problem, is I just don't understand. And does this mean that God will never answer our questions? I don't know. He's kind, he's compassionate, and he may give you an answer when you say, why did you make me like this? He may, but he doesn't owe it to you. So, that's just a happy, good bit of news, isn't it? He doesn't owe you an answer. Aren't you just glad that you came to church tonight? Verse 14. For God may speak in one way or in another, yet man does not perceive it. In a dream, in a vision of the night, when deep sleep falls upon men while slumbering on their beds, then he opens the ears of men and seals their instruction. So God may speak, he says, in one way or another. And I'm going to call a lesson here, can you hear me now? Elihu is reminding us that sometimes God speaks through things like dreams or visions. So I'm going to give you a test. I'm going to play you a dream. I'm going to show you a video, a dream, and you have to guess what the dream is about. Can you read it?
When scent embraces sizzle, who knows where that crispy compass will lead you?
At darkest midnight, the nostrils' north star awaits you.
When imagination blossoms, only this scent will guide you to your greatest awakening. Wake up. Wake up. Wake up. To the morning of your dreams. Only from Oscar Mayer.
I've been waiting for a long time to show that video. You want one of those apps with a little attachment, you wake up smelling bacon. That's a dream I understand. Do you remember those commercials back from 2002?
Can you hear me now? Good. Can you hear me now?
How do you build America's largest wireless network?
Can you hear me now? Good.
By never being satisfied.
Can you hear me now? Good.
Until no matter where you go,
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Your call goes through.
Can you hear me now? Good.
Verizon Wireless. We never stop working for you.
God is not silent. He speaks. The bigger question is, are we listening? Back when the telegraph was the fastest method of long-distance communication, a young man applied for a job as a Morse code operator. He answered an ad in the newspaper and he went to the office address that was listed. When he arrived, he entered a large, busy office filled with noise and clatter, including the sound of the telegraph in the background. A sign on the receptionist's counter instructed job applicants to fill out a form and wait until they were summoned to enter the inner office. The young man filled out the form and sat down with 7 other applicants in the waiting area. After a few minutes, the young man stood up, crossed the room to the door of the inner office, and walked right in. Naturally, the other people perked up and they're wondering what's going on. They muttered amongst themselves that they hadn't heard any summons yet. They assumed that the young man went into the office, made a mistake, and would be disqualified. Within a few minutes, however, the employer escorted the young man out of the office and said to the other applicants, "Gentlemen, thank you very much for coming, but the job has just been filled." The other applicants began grumbling to each other, and one spoke up saying, "Wait a minute, I don't understand. He was the last to come in, and we never even had a chance to be interviewed. Yet he got the job. That's not fair." The employer said, "I'm sorry, but all the time you've been sitting here, the telegraph has been ticking out the following message in Morse code. If you understand this message, then come right in. The job is yours." None of you heard it or understood it. This young man did. The job is his. You may wonder whether God speaks today. I think he does. I think the bigger issue is whether we're listening. Whether we're listening. Verse 17, he speaks, verse 17, in order to turn man from his deed and conceal pride from man. He keeps back his soul from the pit and his life from perishing by the sword. So God speaks. One of the reasons he speaks is to keep men from hell. To keep men from hell. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, you help me, that whoever believes in him would not perish, but have everlasting life. Verse 19. Man is also chastened with pain on his bed, and with strong pain in many of his bones, so that his life abhors bread and his soul succulent food. Man is chastened with pain. The word chastened means, the Hebrew word is yakach. It means to rebuke, to reprove, to correct. And the lesson is about correction in trials. God can speak through dreams. We know God speaks through his word. I think God can speak to our hearts. But sometimes he speaks through difficult times. And sometimes God allows difficulty in our lives to keep us from going astray, to keep us from sin. And I think that's what he's talking about here. And I would agree with him. I would agree that I would disagree that this applies to Job, but I would agree that this is a truth. This is one of the scriptural truths. Sometimes God allows difficulty to keep us from sin. That's what Paul was writing about when he talked about his thorn in the flesh. 2 Corinthians 12, he wrote, verse 7, "And lest I should be exalted above measure," that's the sin that God's keeping him from. He said, "A thorn in the flesh was given to me, a messenger of Satan to buffet me, lest I be exalted above measure. Concerning this thing, I pleaded with the Lord 3 times that it might depart from me. And he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you. My strength is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, most gladly, I will rather boast in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Therefore, I take pleasure in infirmities, in reproaches, in needs, in persecutions, in distresses, for Christ's sake, for when I am weak, then I am strong." Paul saw his thorn in the flesh as helping him to stay humble, to keep him from exalting himself. And so God sometimes speaks in our trials. It might not be a full-blown difficult trial like Job's, but I'll bet this has happened to you before. You know, you're stuck behind a little old lady driving really, really slow. And I've had times where I'm all upset and I'm burning up. Why doesn't she speed up? And then ahead of me, I see that the green light that I would have gone through, somebody just ran the red light and would have broadsided me. I've had that happen before. Have you had stuff like that happen? Where you wonder why you get in this accident, or why you're behind an accident, and you're late to this thing, and then you find out why. You find out why. God speaks to us through pain. In his book, The Problem with Pain, C.S. Lewis wrote, God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pains. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. God speaks through our pain. And even though this is true for some of us going through this, though I just got to remind you, this isn't Job's case. Because God says, who's more blameless than Job? He's my good guy. So that's not the case. This is, again, one of those things where Job's friends are speaking truth. They're giving you a true principle. His other friends were all about God punishes sin. Well, yes, but Job didn't sin. So this is one of those things where there's truth, but it just doesn't apply to Job. Verse 21. His flesh wastes away from sight, and his bones stick out which once were not seen. Yes, his soul draws near the pit, and his life to the executioners. If there is a messenger for him, a mediator, one among 1,000, to show him his uprightness, then he is gracious to him and says, deliver him from going down to the pit. I have found a ransom. His flesh shall be like a child's. He shall return to the days of his youth. Now, he mentions this messenger thing. God can speak through dreams. Now we've seen he speaks through trials. And now he suggests that God can speak through a messenger. The word that's translated messenger, malach, is a representative, a messenger. It's also the Hebrew word for angel. So, and we've talked about this before, both in Old and New Testament. They're different words because it's Hebrew and Greek, but they both mean an angel is somebody who's a messenger. In fact, the New Living Translation says, but if an angel from heaven appears, and speaks. The problem with messengers is that you need to be sure that it's a legitimate messenger, because sometimes we think anybody who tells us something is telling us the right thing. Like, here's an illegitimate messenger. Yeah, I don't think I want that guy doing my acupuncture, if you know what I mean. Okay. And in this, you kind of wonder if Elihu is suggesting that he is God's messenger to Job. I kind of think that that's what he's hinting at here. Verse 26, he shall pray to God, and he will delight in him. This is what happens if a man responds to the messenger. He will pray to God, and he will delight in him. He shall see his face with joy, for he restores to man his righteousness. Then he looks at men and says, then he, talking about like Job would look at men and say, I have sinned and perverted what is right, and it did not profit me. He will redeem his soul from going down to the pit, and his life shall see light. So we're getting back to the same old thing. Elihu is saying things just like the other guys, that if you just pray and get right with God, then everything's going to be okay. Just listen to me, buddy, and then everything will be okay. Verse 29. Behold, God works all these things twice, in fact, 3 times with a man to bring back his soul from the pit, though he may be enlightened with the light of life. Give ear, Job, listen to me. Hold your peace, and I will speak. If you have anything to say, answer me. Speak, for I have desired to justify you. If not, listen to me. Hold your peace, and I will teach you wisdom. Again, he gives him a chance to speak up, but don't speak up too quickly, because I haven't finished yet. It's kind of the thing, It's so nice of him to give him a chance to speak up. Verse 1. We still got 4 more chapters of Elihu speaking. We'll only do 1 more, though, tonight. Elihu further answered and said, hear my words, you wise men. Give ear to me, you who have knowledge. Now, here I think he's talking about you wise men. He's talking about Job's friends. Now you guys listen up. For the ear tests words as the palate tastes food. Let us choose justice for ourselves. Let us know among ourselves what is good. For Job has said, I am righteous, but God has taken away my justice. Should I lie concerning my right? My wound is incurable, though I am without transgression. And the idea here, we say, should I lie about my right? The idea is that Job's friends want him to admit that he's sinned. But the only way he's going to admit that he's sinned is if he lies about it, because he can't think of what he did wrong. So, verse 7, what man is like Job, who drinks scorn like water, who goes in company with the workers of iniquity and walks with wicked man? For he has said, it profits a man nothing that he should delight in God. When he says he drinks scorn like water, I think he's talking about the fact that he's just getting heaped one criticism after another on him, something like that. Verse 10. Therefore listen to me, you men of understanding. Far be it from God to do wickedness, and from the Almighty to commit iniquity. For he repays man according to his work, and makes man to find a reward according to his way. Surely God will never do wickedly, nor will the Almighty pervert justice. God will never do wickedly. And he's absolutely correct in this. And the lesson, simple one, friends, is that God is good. That's one of those anchors we've talked about. That's one of the anchors that gets you through the storm, is that he's good. He's not evil. He's not plotting your destruction. Now that's kind of what Job has fallen into. He's thinking God's out to get him, but he's not. God is good. One of my favorite verses about this is 1 John 1:5. This is the message which we have heard from him and declared to you, that God is light, and in him is no darkness at all. You and I may not understand what's going on, but one thing we can know for sure is that God is good. God knows what he's doing. He's good. Am I the only one? Have you ever wondered if God's out to get you? If God's trying to ruin your life? Good. I'm glad I'm not the only one in here, because I have thought that at times. I just don't get it. How come things haven't happened the way I thought they would? No. He is good. He is light. And in him is no darkness, no hidden motives, no secret out to get you because you just really bug him. You know, I must have done something that just really bugs you. No. The problem is I simply don't understand. That's the problem. The problem is not in God. Verse 13. Who gave him charge over the earth, or who appointed him over the whole world? If he should set his heart on it, if he should go gather to himself his spirit and his breath, all flesh would perish together, and man would return to the dust. Here what he's talking about is that the fact that our very life depends on the breath of God. He holds our breath in his hands. If God wanted to, he could just let go and we'd be all dead. We'd be all gone. When Paul spoke to the men in Athens, he described God as God who made the world and everything in it, since he is Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in temples made with hands, nor is he worshipped with men's hands as though he needed anything, since he gives to all life, breath, and all things. He gives us breath. Paul writes in Colossians chapter 1, verse 17, he existed before anything else, and he holds all creation together. You know, that's one of the things I don't know if the atomic nuclear scientists have figured out yet what holds protons together in the nucleus of an atom. But, you remember the old, first, third grade science magnet tricks. How do you get positive charges to stick together? What holds the universe together? We think it's God. And at some point he will let go. Peter describes the heavens will melt in fire. But for now, he holds it all together. Without his breath, all flesh would perish. Verse 16, if you have understanding, hear this. Listen to the sound of my words. Should one who hates justice govern? Will you condemn him who is most just? Or his idea is, how could God continue to govern the universe if he hates justice? Verse 18, is it fitting to say to a king, you are worthless, and to nobles, you are wicked? Yet he is not partial to princes, nor does he regard the rich more than the poor, for they are all the work of his hand. So God does not play favorites with people who have titles, like princes. Verse 20, in a moment they die in the middle of the night. The people are shaken and pass away. The mighty are taken away without a hand. For his eyes are on the ways of man, and he sees all his steps. These are all true things. There is no darkness nor shadow of death where the workers of iniquity may hide themselves. For he need not further consider a man that he should go before God in judgment. He breaks in pieces mighty men without inquiry and sets others in their place. Therefore he knows their works. He overthrows them in the night and they are crushed. He strikes them as wicked men in the open sight of others, because they turned back from him and would not consider any of his ways, so that they caused the cry of the poor to come to him, for he hears the cry of the afflicted. We've mentioned James a couple of times tonight. James also warns rich people who would take advantage of their workers. In James 5:4, James writes, indeed, the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud, cry out. And the cries of the reapers have reached the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth. Sabaoth, that's not Sabbath. That's not the word for Sabbath. Sabaoth is the Hebrew word for hosts or armies. You've heard of, he is the Lord of hosts. That's an Old Testament term. The word and it's not talking like he's the bestest of all people at setting places at the table, or he's the hostess with the mostest. No, the biblical word for host means an army of men. He is the Lord of Sabaoth. I think it's the New Living Translation that says it this way. It always talks about him being the Lord of heaven's armies. That's who God is. And so here the warning is to rich people who would take advantage of their laborers, you know what? You're going to have to face God one day, because God will hear their cries. God will hear their cries, and you're going to have to face the Lord of heaven's armies. Don't want that. Don't want that. For those of you who feel you got ripped off by your bosses, you know what? You ought to feel sorry for your bosses, because they will face God one day. And when you cry out to God and say, this isn't fair, God hears. And this is what Elihu is mentioning, and this is what James confirms. Verse 29. When he gives quietness, who then can make trouble? When he hides his face, who then can see him? Whether it is against a nation or a man alone, that the hypocrite should not reign, lest the people be ensnared. Verse 31. For has anyone said to God, I have borne chastening, I will offend no more. Teach me what I do not know. If I have done iniquity, I will do no more. Now, what he's saying here is he's wondering why people who go through difficulty don't just admit that they were wrong and just learn their lesson. You know, why don't people just turn around? That's kind of what he's saying. He says, verse 33, should he repay it according to your terms just because you disavow it? You must choose, and not I. Therefore, speak what you know. So according to his term, New Living Translation says, must God tailor his justice to your demands? But you have rejected him. The choice is yours, not mine. Go ahead, share your wisdom with us. Now, he's wrong in applying this to Job. But there is a principle here that's interesting, because people have this mistaken idea that God's going to play by their rules. You hear it all the time. If you ever bring up hell, people will say, well, I don't believe God would send people to hell. Well, I have a question. Since when does God live by your rules? He doesn't. He doesn't go, oh, Rich, I forgot. How am I supposed to do this? Would you fill me in on this? No. He is a God of justice. He's a God of laws. He's a God of right and wrong. And he doesn't change. And people can argue. You know, a lot of us pastors are going to be on this homosexual thing for quite a while. And rightfully so, it is right where we are smack dab in the middle of for our culture. And there's a movie I just saw a couple of days ago. We're going to do another movie night. I won't wait too long for this one. It's called Audacity. It's put out by, I can't remember his name. Ray Comfort, yes. And it's very well done. It deals with the issue of homosexuality, and not out of anger, not out of meanness, not out of condemnation, but out of love, but speaking the truth. And people like to think, well, how could it be wrong if we just love each other? Well, you missed the whole boat, buddy. You missed the whole boat. What you call love doesn't make everything right. It doesn't. It's not that simple. We're already seeing things where there's a fellow in Montana that's going to now go and register his second wife, and because he wants to be married to two women at the same time. Because if the gays can do what they want to make them feel happy, well, this is our right. And you see it in the commercials nowadays in July 4th, the pursuit of happiness. That's part of our American rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so whatever makes you happy, it must be okay. Somehow we've interpreted that to be, and of course everybody goes, well, polygamy can't be right. Oh, would you just wait? That's what they said about homosexuality 10 years ago. It's just only a matter of time. Pedophilia could be another. I can't even conceive of that. But there are countries in Europe where it's okay. God doesn't play by our rules. And we're mistaken to think that he must. It's silly. He's the creator. He's the one who makes the rules. We need to pay attention to him. We need to pay, and his rules aren't for meanness, they're for our good. They're for our best. I think one of the things that we've swallowed too easily is this whole idea that people are born gay. And I just am not sure that we've actually seen the science. I remember 15 years ago, they were talking about the potential that they thought they'd found, the brains of gay men. No. They haven't found a gay gene. They haven't. In fact, I think there are studies where there are identical twins, have the same genetic structure, and one is gay and one is not. It's not that simple. It's not that simple. But if I was born that way, then I can blame God, correct? No. I'm sorry, I'm going off I'm ranting and raving, aren't I? I'm such a raving lunatic. Verse 34. Men of understanding, say to me, wise men who listen to me, Job speaks. I'm not done. I'm sorry. Let me say this. I had this in my notes, but I cut it out because I didn't think I had enough time. You and I have to equally be careful that we don't come off as if we hate homosexual people, because that's wrong. God loves them as much as he loves all of us sinners. Where we disagree is whether it's right or wrong. But Jesus came for sinners. Paul writes in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, and I had it in my notes, but I cut it out, sorry. He talks about all this lists of sins, about idolaters, thieves, adulterers, homosexuals. And the list, there's probably 7 or 8 things that are listed there. Are all those other things okay? Is it okay to commit adultery? Is it okay to lie? Is it okay to be an idolater? Most people would agree still that those are okay. But somehow, see, and then Paul says, and yet such were some of you. We are all sinners. Every one of us have been saved by our sin, and we are no greater than a person who is caught in the homosexual delusion. We are no greater. We ought to love them. We ought to be concerned for them. And if we are concerned for them, then we ought to be reaching out to them and loving on them, not arguing with them, but loving on them so that we can reach them. Anyway, okay, now I'm off of my thing, sorry. Verse 34, men of understanding say to me, wise men who listen to me, Job speaks without knowledge. His words are without wisdom. Oh, that Job were tried to the uttermost, because his answers are like those of a wicked man. He just wishes that Job would get everything that's coming to him. For he adds rebellion to his sin. He claps his hand among us and multiplies his words against God. Clapping the hands. In the Middle East, this was a way of showing anger, of showing cursing, not applauding, but of cursing someone, you, kind of like that. And so he's saying that Job is an angry, mean guy. Because apparently he's been clapping his hands at him, which I would, if that's what it means, I would be mad at them too. I'd be clapping my hands too at the stuff that they've been saying. There's a lesson here. And I'm going to call it the patience of Job. Congregation was having trouble with the preacher because he was preaching far too long. I'm watching my time. I've only got 5 more minutes. So this said, don't talk, don't look at me. They had a business meeting about the matter, and they decided it would help if they bought a gavel, and after 1 hour, someone would tap the pew to signal that the time was up. The preacher agreed to this tap thing. The first night, a young boy wanted the honors of keeping time and tapping on the back of the pew in front of him. After an hour, he's a little too embarrassed to make the noise tapping on the pew. The preacher continued to preach on, and all the eyes of the congregation became focused on the boy. They all began to mouth words to the boy. Go on, go on. He became angry and tried to hit the pew with a loud knock, but instead he brought the gavel down on the guy in front of him. The wounded member was falling over his seat, and he said, hit me again, I can still hear him. Just like that preacher, the arguments of Job's friends come on and on and on, and they don't stop. It never seems to end. Nothing they say, they don't really say anything new, they're just repeating themselves. And trials are like that, aren't they? We'd like somebody to slap the gavel down and say, stop it, I'm done with this trial. James, again, how many times have I quoted James tonight? Has anybody kept track? 3, 4? Several times. 3 times. Here's the best one. James chapter 5, verse 7. Therefore be patient. I wonder whether James had been studying the book of Job when he wrote it, because there's so many parallels. James 5:7. Therefore be patient, brethren, until the coming of the Lord. See how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, waiting patiently for it until it receives the early and latter rain. You also be patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. Do not grumble against one another, brethren, lest you be condemned. Behold, the judge is standing at the door. My brethren, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord as an example of suffering and patience. Indeed, we count them blessed who endure. You have heard of the perseverance, or King James is the patience of Job, and seen the likely end intended by the Lord, that the Lord is very compassionate and merciful. When we hear about the patience of Job or the perseverance of Job, I usually think of the difficulties that he's going through, the health things, the loss of his wealth and his kids being gone. But I kind of wonder if some of it has to do with the patience with his friends. That's why I read the verse where he says, don't grumble against each other. Because sometimes the hardest thing in the trial is how people are treating you in the trial. We need to endure. We need to endure. Yeah, to wrap that. Yeah, there you go. We're done. And according to this, I'm like a minute early, so let's stand and pray. Father, help us to stay teachable. I pray, Lord, for any of my friends here tonight who are going through difficulties. And I pray for those that are going through difficulties and they don't even know why. Help us to hold on to you. Help us to trust you. Help us to remember that you are good. You are not evil. You dwell in light. There is no darkness in you. And Father, even though we don't understand it, help us to endure. Help us to follow Job's footsteps to a point. We don't want to be complaining against you like Job, but we do want to trust you like Job. Thank you. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, God bless you.